So I've been toying with the idea of making a video to talk about my feelings because that seems to be what we do now. We just talk about our feelings online because everyone's opinion matters. Why not just talk about our feelings? And one thing that has really surprised me in recent years is the separation and layers that we seem to attach to one set of values over another. And what I mean by that is one group may hold something to be more valuable than the other, and if you're not in the group that values said thing as much as the other, well then your opinion is now wrong because who are you to not value said thing? And I'll tie this back into let's go with careers, right? And how we pick our careers. So there's a difference between internal value, intrinsic value, and now we have a social value, right? So an internal value is something obviously within ourselves that we say, this means a lot to me for whatever the reason is, and it's important and I'm going to do it. Woo-ha, I'm doing it. An intrinsic value is a bit different in that it the value is sort of self-sustained. It's inherently good. So loving your kid, being a parent, being a doctor, there are intrinsic values to this. Being a caregiver or a nurturer, there are intrinsic values to these things. And then of course you have like what we call now like a social value, right? So a example of a social value would be being an advocate for gender equality or racial equality. You know, things that have recently become part of the social norm that otherwise probably would not exist, right? And I say all this to say that two things can be right at the same time, and two things can be wrong at the same time. When you deal with conflict, if you've ever taken any courses on interpersonal communications, you'll find that the triggering event rarely is at the tip of the iceberg, right? There are layers beneath on both, however many parties are involved in said conflict. There are several layers beneath that contributed towards said triggering event. And what we're learning now is we're sort of this place where we're ignoring these layered causes, and we're only looking at the triggering events, and we say we need to fix said event without ever considering that there might be root causes, and ignoring my military people out there, right? Because we all have that whole the whole comprehensive and positive like risk management and the decision making process, and identifying problem. We're gonna ignore all that, right? We're just gonna go to like, oh my goodness, my feelings are hurt and I need to feel better. Well, I mean, we all want to feel better, but how do we get to the point where our feelings are hurt in the first place? Is there something that could be done? Now let's go back to the two things can be right and two things can be wrong at the same time. Rarely do we find in an argument that one person is all the way bad and one person is all the way good. That is not common when it comes to interpersonal conflict or any conflict at all. There's generally some fault to be found on both sides, and generally righteousness to be found on both sides. But history tends to reward the victor of each conflict. Just keep that in mind, eh? So, we're now at this place now where we're all factoring information and we're funneling things in and we're all upset and we're all our feelings that at the same time, constantly, I don't know how any of us are sane because there's so much information flowing in all the time. So much though that rarely as a society do we stop and take a step and say, well, how do we get here? What's wrong? Why do people feel this way about X? And what are items or elements that led to people to feel such a way? We just say, oh, well, if you're in this group, you feel this way, and if you're this group, you feel that way. And depending on how the pendulum is swinging, one is right and one is wrong. And essentially, it's this never-ending circle of really like stupidity, right? Because we're not getting anywhere. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk about is it's okay to be wrong. I've been wrong a lot. Like if my dad's watching this, he'll be like, yo bro, you be fucking up. I'm like, you're right, Dad. I'll be fucking up. And if, my family, my sister, brother, kids, anybody else knows me, they'd be like, man, you be fucking up a lot, bro. I'm like, man, right, I do be fucking up. But every now and then I get something right. And you can just rewind that, and keep going and keep going. The point is, it is okay to acknowledge that we all have faults. But it's also okay to acknowledge when the other person might be right. And where do we meet in the middle? If we're so focused on who's right and who's wrong, that's cool. But where do we find the middle ground? Because that's where the sweet spot is. And that's how we become better. Because we can all play this Hatfield and McCoy game for the end of time, but at the end of the day, the feud is still going to be there, and we'll have gotten nowhere. And essentially, at some point, we have to realize that we are all we have. It's just us. We have to take care of each other. We have to take care of each other. No one's going to do it for us. And I think that it's just important that we remember that life is a journey. It's not a destination. No one is born with all the answers. It's the process of getting there. And it's okay to be wrong. Because the journey of life is collecting knowledge, and then eventually we get it right. And we're supposed to pass that information along to people so they don't make the same mistakes and endure the same strifes. And we should just keep that in mind. And I really thank anybody for listening to this, because I'm probably just rambling, because I've been drinking quite a bit. And I'm going to go back to doing that. Happy Friday, y'all. You stay classy.